On December 22nd, 1944, Private First Class Leo Palmer, a runner for the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, felt a cold deeper than any he had ever known. It wasn't just the Belgian winter, a vicious, blade-like thing that sank through his inadequate field jacket and settled in his bones. It was the cold of isolation. He was huddled in a frozen foxhole on the perimeter of a town called Bastogne. For 4 days the world had been a hell of snow, fog, and the concussive, ear-splitting drumbeat of German 88mm artillery. The trees around him were skeletal, shattered by shell fire. The fog was so thick it seemed to swallow sound, making the whiz-bang of incoming rounds even more terrifying. His unit, along with the rest of the 101st Airborne and a few scattered armored and infantry units, was completely surrounded. They were the donut, and 70,000 Germans were the whole. And then, through the swirling mist, Palmer saw something that broke his reality. It was absurd. 4 figures walking out of the German-held woods. 4 German soldiers, one of them clearly an officer, another carrying a massive, impossibly white flag of truce. A few nervous shots from the American line barked into the silence. Then an order was shouted. "Hold your fire! Hold your fire!" The world for a moment held its breath. Palmer watched, his knuckles white on the frozen stock of his M1 rifle, as the German delegation was challenged by men from F Company 327. They were blindfolded, their hands bound, and then led past his position, deeper into the American perimeter. They were heading for his regimental command post. A cold dread, sharper than the winter air, settled on Palmer. A white flag in this situation meant only one of 2 things. Either the Germans were surrendering, which seemed impossible, or they were here to demand that they surrender. Given the nonstop shelling, the lack of food, the critically low ammunition, and the screams from the makeshift aid station in the town cellar, Palmer knew which one it was. This single surreal moment would become the fulcrum of one of the Second World War's most enduring legends. But to understand the weight of that white flag, to grasp the sheer defiant audacity of the American response, you must first understand the frozen hell of Bastogne and the cataclysm that had created it. This was the Battle of the Bulge. Just 6 days earlier, on December 16th, Adolf Hitler, in a final desperate gamble, had unleashed Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. It was a massive last-ditch counteroffensive, a thunderous blow of over 250,000 men and more than 1,000 tanks, hurled through the quiet, snow-covered Ardennes forest. This sector, held by the Green 106th Infantry Division and the battered 28th, was considered the Ghost Front, a place for rest and refit. The Allies had become arrogant, convinced the German Wehrmacht was broken. They were wrong. Hitler's plan was as ambitious as it was insane: to punch a hole through the thin American lines, split the Allied armies in 2, bypass Paris, and seize the critical port of Antwerp. This, he believed, would sever the Allies' supply line and force them to sue for a negotiated peace, just as the Germans themselves had been forced to do in 1918. The surprise was total. The initial impact of the 6th Panzer and 5th Panzer armies was catastrophic. 2 regiments of the 106th Division were encircled and captured almost instantly. The the largest mass surrender of American troops since the Civil War. The 28th Infantry, the Bloody Bucket Division, fought heroically but was simply shattered, its remnants streaming west in disarray. The road to the Meuse River and beyond it, Antwerp, lay wide open. A massive bulge was being punched into the Allied front line. And right in the center of this bulge, the dead center of the German advance, sat a modest Belgian market town, Bastogne. Bastogne was not a fortress, it was a crossroads, but it was the most important crossroads in the Ardennes. 7 paved roads converged in its central square. For the tanks and supply trucks of General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army, these roads were not just convenient, they were essential. Without them, his armored columns would be forced onto the muddy, snow-clogged secondary roads, where they would bog down, burn precious, irreplaceable fuel, and stall. Bastogne was the linchpin. It had to be taken, and taken quickly. The Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, understood this instantly. In a crisis meeting at his headquarters in Reims, he looked for a unit, any unit, that could be thrown into the gap. He found the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, resting and refitting in Mormelon, France after the brutal meat grinder of Operation Market Garden in Holland. There was no time for planning. There was no time for reconnaissance. The division was alerted. The paratroopers, an elite light infantry force designed to fight surrounded, but only for 72 hours, were unceremoniously piled onto a massive convoy of open-topped, wet ball express trucks, many driven by African-American drivers of the Quartermaster Corps who hadn't slept in days. The paratroopers had no winter gear. Many had no sleeping bags. Some didn't even have their primary weapons. They had been told they were going to a fire drill. They drove all night, a 107-mile journey into a blizzard with no idea what awaited them. They arrived in Bastogne on the 19th of December, just as the fog of war was clearing. And just hours later, the elite German Panzerlehr and 2nd Panzer divisions, having bypassed the town to the north and south, linked up to the west. The trap was sprung. The siege had begun. The man in command of this isolated garrison was not the 101st famous leader, General Maxwell Taylor, who was back in Washington for a staff meeting. In his place was the acting commander, Brigadier General Anthony C. McAuliffe. McAuliffe was an artilleryman by trade, short, energetic, and possessed of a bulldog's tenacity. He was not a paratrooper, but he had their absolute respect. His new command post was a cold, damp cellar in a town's army barracks. His situation was, by any objective measure, hopeless. He had roughly 14,000 men, the 101st, the remnants of Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division, and a hodgepodge of other units. They were low on ammunition, critically low on medical supplies, and had almost no winter clothing. They were facing a coordinated assault from all sides by nearly 70,000 veteran German troops, backed by hundreds of tanks and assault guns. The fog was a co-conspirator, a thick, wet gray blanket that grounded the Allied air power, which had been their guardian angel since D-Day. The process of survival was brutal. McAuliffe established a 360-degree perimeter, a thin line of foxholes in the frozen ground around the town. The fighting was immediate and savage. In the village of Noville, north of Bastogne, a small task force from the 10th Armored and the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment fought a delaying action of incredible heroism, holding off an entire German panzer division for 2 days before being forced to withdraw. To the east, in the Bulge woods, men of the 506th Easy Company, later made famous by Band of Brothers, were being pounded relentlessly by artillery, their foxholes filling with snow and the blood of their comrades. The division's chief surgeon, Major Douglas Standish, had his main aid station overrun in the first hours. The wounded were now gathered in the Sarma grocery store cellar, where medics like Eugene Rowe worked by flashlight. With no plasma, no bandages, and only a handful of morphine syringes. The cold was an enemy unto itself. Frostbite was rampant. Rifles and machine guns froze solid. Men who took their boots off to massage their feet found they couldn't get them back on. A soldier from the 501st, Don R. Burgett, later recalled, "We were cold, hungry, and our ammunition was low. We were fighting tanks with rifles and machine guns. The division was down to its last 10 rounds of artillery ammunition per gun. The tankers of the 10th Armored Team de Zobri were told not to fire their cannons unless they had a confirmed, visible tank target. McAuliffe was everywhere, his Jeep, nicknamed the Old Hog, skidding on the icy roads as he visited every part of the line, encouraging his men, shifting his meager reserves to plug gaps. They've got us surrounded, the poor bastards," one paratrooper famously joked, perfectly capturing the airborne spirit. But by December 22nd, the joke was wearing thin. The situation was desperate. This was the moment the Germans chose to break their will. The 4-man delegation was brought to the command post of Colonel Joseph Bud Harper, commander of the 327th. Harper, suspecting what they wanted, called McAuliffe's headquarters. The general was in his sleeping bag on a cot in the cellar, trying to catch his first real sleep in days. His operations officer, Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kennard, shook him awake. "Sir, the Germans have sent a party over with a white flag." McAuliffe, groggy and irritated, mumbled, "They want to surrender?" Kennard shook his head. "No, sir. They want us to surrender." McAuliffe, now instantly awake, bolted upright. "You're kidding me," he snapped. He thought it was a German trick, a ruse. But when Colonel Harper arrived with the typed document, the general realized it was deadly serious. The note was formal and almost polite. It was from the German commander to the USA commander. It began by praising the gallant defense of Bastogne, but it quickly got to the point. The situation, it stated, was hopeless. Bastogne was surrounded. More German armored units were arriving. It offered a stark choice: honorable surrender within 2 hours, at which point the Americans would be treated as prisoners of war and the civilians of Bastogne would be spared. The alternative was blunt. If this proposal should be rejected, 1 German artillery corps and 6 heavy AA battalions are ready to annihilate the USA troops. The following firing will destroy Bastogne and its civilian population. It was signed by General von Lutwitz. The American staff in the cellar, Kennard, Harper, and others, stared at the paper. They were exhausted. They were freezing. They were being offered a way out. The threat of annihilation was not a bluff. They could hear the German tank engines and artillery pieces moving into position. This was the moment of decision. But for Anthony McAuliffe, there was no decision to be made. His response was visceral, immediate, and utterly profane. He laughed. Us surrender? Oh, nuts, he scoffed. He crumpled the paper and threw it on the floor. His staff, sensing his iron resolve, broke into relieved laughter. The tension was shattered. Now they just had to figure out a proper, formal reply. Should they write a long-winded rejection? A patriotic speech on paper? McAuliffe cut them off. He grabbed a pencil and a fresh sheet of paper. My first reaction was the best one, he said. He thought for a moment, then scribbled something. How does this sound? He asked his staff. The room erupted. It was perfect. The official reply was typed up. It was addressed to the German commander. It contained only one word, centered on the page. N-U-T-S. It was signed, the American commander. This was the invention, not a new weapon, but a new kind of defiance. It was a psychological masterstroke. But a word is just a word. Now it had to be tested. Colonel Harper was tasked with delivering the message. He and Major Jones walked back to the checkpoint where the German delegation was waiting impatiently, stamping their feet in the snow. The German officer, a major, took the small folded piece of paper. He opened it and stared, his face a mask of confusion. He looked up at Harper. What does this mean? He demanded. Is this a negative or an affirmative reply? Harper, savoring the moment, decided to give the German a lesson in American vernacular. The reply is decidedly not affirmative, he said, puffing his chest. In plain English, it means go to hell. And I'll tell you something else. If you continue to attack, we will kill every goddamn German who tries to break into this town. The German major, now understanding, turned white with rage. You will be destroyed, he sputtered. We are killing many more Americans than you are killing Germans. Harper just pointed. On your way, bud. The stunned, insulted delegation was led back to their lines, carrying the most famous and most defiant single-word reply in military history. The test began immediately. General von Lutwitz, as good as his word, was enraged. He ordered the total annihilation to begin. The full weight of the German forces was now thrown at Bastogne in a coordinated, all-out assault. The Luftwaffe, which had been grounded by the same fog as the Allies, now took advantage of it, sending bombers on low-level raids. On Christmas Eve, the town itself was heavily bombed, setting buildings ablaze. The wounded in the aid station had to be moved again as the church they were in was hit. But McAuliffe had used the ultimatum as a weapon. He immediately drafted a Christmas message to his troops. It was typed up on any paper they could find and distributed to every frozen foxhole. It read, "What's merry about all this, you ask? We're fighting. We have stopped cold everything that has been thrown at us." The defiant answer, nuts, was given to a German ultimatum. That answer is echoed by all ranks. We are giving our country and our loved ones a Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Die. That one word, nuts, electrified the 101st. It was a rallying cry. It was profane. It was stubborn. It was funny. And it was perfectly American. It was a shared secret, an inside joke. It told every freezing, starving paratrooper that their general was just as crazy and stubborn as they were. It told them they were not going to quit. What do you think is more powerful in a siege? Ammunition and food, or the will to fight? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The Germans attacked with a renewed savage fury. They threw tanks and infantry at the western perimeter, creating a massive bulge in the line, nearly breaking through near the village of Himro. The fighting was desperate, hand to hand in the snow-filled woods. Men from the 327th and 502nd fixed bayonets. But the paratroopers, now fueled by pure unadulterated defiance, refused to break. They held. And then, on December 23rd, the day after the reply, a miracle happened. The sky, which had been a solid, oppressive gray for a week, turned blue. The fog lifted. The sun, a glorious, blinding white orb, broke through, and with it came salvation. The skies over Bastogne filled with C-47 transport planes, hundreds of them, flying in perfect formation. Operation Repulse had begun. The besieged garrison, men who hadn't eaten a warm meal in a week, stood up in their foxholes and cheered. Brightly colored parachutes bloomed by the thousands, dropping the supplies they so desperately needed. Ammunition, K-rations, plasma, batteries, clean socks, and mail from home. The morale of the 101st skyrocketed from the depths of despair to the heights of euphoria. But the C-47s didn't come alone. They were followed by the Jabos, the P-47 Thunderbolts, tank killers, armed with rockets and 50 caliber machine guns. For 7 days, the German panzers had operated with impunity. Now they were a target-rich environment. Dark shapes stark against the white snow. The P-47s swooped down like avenging angels, raining hell on the German armor concentrated around the town. The hunter had, at last, become the hunted. McAuliffe's one-word reply had bought them just enough time. If you're inspired by this kind of leadership against all odds, take a second to hit that like button to honor their incredible sacrifice. While the 101st was fighting for its life inside the pocket, another legendary American general was staging one of the most brilliant and controversial maneuvers of the war. General George S. Patton Jr., Old Blood and Guts, was in command of the Third Army, fighting a completely different battle far to the south. When Eisenhower held his desperate command meeting at Verdun on December 19th, asking who could relieve Bastogne, Patton was the only one with a plan. He stunned the room. "I can have 3 divisions in Bastogne in 48 hours, he growled. The other generals, including Eisenhower's own staff, thought he was insane or boasting. It was an impossible task. It meant disengaging from a battle in progress, turning his entire Third Army 90 degrees north and marching over 100 miles through a blizzard on icy, treacherous roads. But Patton wasn't boasting. He had already intuitively begun making contingency plans. He hung up the phone, returned to his staff, and gave the order. The great turn was on. For the men in Bastogne, the test was not over. The Germans knew their time was running out. They launched a final massive assault on Christmas Day. The fighting was the heaviest of the siege. But the 101st, resupplied by air and supported by the P-47s, was a different animal. They bent, they yielded ground, but they did not break. Then, on the day after Christmas, December 26, the men of the 101st heard a new sound. It was not the high-velocity crack of a German 88. It was the deeper, throatier boom of an American 76-millimeter gun, firing as they came. The men looked south and saw them, Sherman tanks painted white for winter, plowing through the snow. The lead elements of Patton's 4th Armored Division, led by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams' 37th Tank Battalion, had smashed through the German southern flank at the village of Assinois and punched a narrow corridor into Bastogne. The siege was broken. The first tank to link up, named Cobra King, was greeted by cheering, weeping paratroopers. The impact of holding Bastogne was immediate and strategically decisive. By refusing to surrender, the 14,000 battered bastards of Bastogne had created a bone in the throat of the entire German offensive. They had tied down 70,000 German troops and multiple elite panzer divisions for a solid, critical week. They had wrecked Hitler's precise timetable. The German armored columns, unable to use the critical crossroads, had run out of fuel, their advance stalling just short of the Meuse River. The failure to take Bastogne was the high water mark of the German Reich in the West. It broke the back of Hitler's last gamble. The Battle of the Bulge would rage for another bloody month, but the German offensive was doomed, having spent its last reserves on this one tiny, defiant town. The 101st Airborne Division would become one of only 2 American divisions in the entire war to receive the Presidential Unit Citation, an award given to the entire division for its extraordinary heroism. The stand at Bastogne and the defiant reply that defined it became an immortal legend. It was a victory not of superior technology or numbers, but of pure, stubborn American grit. It proved that sometimes, in the darkest, coldest hour, the most powerful weapon in an army's arsenal isn't a tank or a cannon, but a single, defiant word. Nuts! It was the perfect reply from the perfect unit at the perfect time. The story of Bastogne is a chilling, inspiring reminder of what soldiers endure, what true leadership looks like, and what it means to hold the line when all is lost. Don't forget to hit that notification bell and subscribe to our channel so you never miss our next deep dive into the battles, the heroes, and the incredible stories that defined our history.